Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 15. The Plucky High School Girl. That's done. Jinwoo hung up the phone. At first, Sangmin hadn't known what to make of the request, but he'd been fully willing to comply after hearing Jinwoo's explanation. Thus, Jinwoo would be able to observe the White Tiger Guild's newest trainees' raided dungeon. I've also borrowed a car. Jinho had taken time out of his busy day to bring the van around. He'd apologized for having to head back right away to wherever he'd come from. As Jinwoo watched him leave, the thought crossed his mind that Jinho was a genuinely commendable person. With that, all the preparations were complete. Jinwoo currently stood outside the apartment complex of the student in question. It's not far from our place. 2 minutes walk. Just a stone's throw away. He took a look around the block. It was a small neighborhood where old buildings crowded up against one another. Obviously, her family didn't come from money either. He definitely understood why the girl was excited about being a hunter. He'd been there, done that. People like her are always the first casualties. He'd been injured more than a few times. There were even several near-death experiences. If it wasn't for his mother's illness, he wouldn't have taken this job to begin with. A dungeon was a very cruel place for an E-rank hunter. If he just let the girl be, she would regret becoming a hunter, or she might get killed before she had the chance. That's pretty common, unfortunately. Tens of hunters got hurt, or worse, every day. Jinwoo couldn't help all of them, nor did he have reason to. They'd each made their own choices. But once he'd heard who she was, he knew he couldn't stand idly by and do nothing. The name was familiar to him. Jinwoo sensed a presence and looked up to see the little troublemaker walking toward him. Her hair was in a bun, and there was a spark of attitude in her eyes. It was her. Huh? The high schooler blinked at him. What are you doing here, mister? They instantly recognized each other. Small world, indeed. He scratched the side of his head. The high school girl who wanted to be a hunter. She was also the only female member and minor in Jinho's strike squad. She'd been the one Jinwoo had been worried about working with. Is it okay to work with minors? I consulted an advisor, and there shouldn't be a problem, legally speaking. No one hires minors because of potential issues if there's an incident. Song Han. So many emotions had run through his mind when he heard the homeroom teacher utter her name. To be sure, Jinwoo had looked into the matter. She'd started skipping school around the same time Jinho's strike squad started doing raids. At this point, it was hard for him to maintain that. It was none of his business. He felt some kind of responsibility. He had played a part in giving her false hope by paying her so much money, even though she was still a student. There's one thing I know for sure. He'd be racked with guilt if he ever heard she got killed in a dungeon for whatever reason. There was no need to lose any sleep over her later if he could talk to her now. For that reason, he decided to spend some time with her today. It wasn't like it was that hard. What are you doing here? Songi stared wide-eyed at Jinwoo. She suddenly grew astonished. Are you the hunter my teacher wanted me to meet, mister? The mister thing didn't sit well with him, but he smiled and nodded anyway. I don't know what my teacher told you, but I'm not interested in going to school anymore. And I have no intention of quitting hunting. Songi was adamant. She was quiet when she was with the squad, but her attitude shifted when it was about her. She was just like every kid her age with their clear worldview. The thing is, I have my own kid with her own worldview back home. Jinwoo put on a big smile. Songi faltered, not knowing what to make of his reaction. He spoke to her calmly. I didn't come here to tell you to quit. She was caught off guard again. What? Kids like Songi went in harder when ordered to stop. Jinwoo had never intended to reason with her. What he needed to do was show her the reality. Because I was the same way. He'd come to this realization during his own first raid. The reality of hunting was much crueler than he'd expected. Songi tried her best not to show her confusion. Then why are you here? Jinwoo moved closer to her. She flinched and was going to take a step back but stopped herself, as she didn't want him to think he'd intimidated her. Jinwoo stood in front of her and, without realizing, gave her a wicked grin. I'm here to make you a great hunter. Jinwoo didn't have to twist Songi's arm to get her to go with him to a dungeon. When he told her there was an opportunity to watch the newest members of the Great White Tiger Guild training, she immediately agreed to tag along. She didn't seem to suspect that Jinwoo was up to something. When she asked how he knew her teacher, he showed her a picture of himself with Jaina. Are you really Jaina's older brother, mister? That word still bugged him for some reason, but he let it slide, since everything was going according to plan. Hop in. Thank you. Jinwoo took Songi to where the White Tiger Guild rookies were planning to do some nighttime training. He was told it'd start at 9, so there was plenty of time to get there. Vroom. The black van that was far too big for just 2 passengers seemed to drift around a bend. Were his agility and perception stats responsible for this? Even though he hadn't driven since he'd first gotten his driver's license, Jinwoo found it easy to maneuver the vehicle. Whenever he focused, the other cars started to remind him of snails. These stats are quite versatile. Sitting in the passenger seat, Songi asked, Does Jaina really study all the time at home, too? Rumor has it, she put up pages of an English dictionary as her bedroom wallpaper, so she can study even as she falls asleep. Was there really a rumor like that about her? To Jinwoo, she was just a sleepyhead who loved fried chicken. Jaina is just like you. When she comes home, she plays games, eats, and sleeps. Though the majority of the time, she sleeps. No way. Then how are her grades so good? I have no idea either. When she was in middle school, she used to go to the arcade all the time with me. They continued their conversation until they arrived near the gate. Jinwoo parked the car. SKRRCH. This specific neighborhood had been designated as a concentrated area for gates. It was easy to find parking because so many residents had moved out. Jinwoo had heard somewhere that around 80% of the houses had been abandoned. There was also talk of the whole place being leveled once the remaining residents left. TMP. Jinwoo and Songi got out of the van. There was a sense of foreboding permeating the air. What? Jinwoo thought he heard cheering coming from the shadow beneath his feet. Was that all in his head? Songi looked frightened by the spooky surroundings until she saw other hunters gathered in the distance. Her eyes twinkled as if she'd spotted celebrities. After all, they're hunters with the White Tiger Guild. To a student who admired hunters, they were basically rock stars, weren't they? Considering how hunters were portrayed on TV, that was an apt description. Oh, you really did come. Kitchell saw Jinwoo and beelined straight for him. Do you remember me? Jinwoo nodded lightly. Since Kitchell's smile was genuine, rather than something to be used for a sales pitch, Jinwoo smiled back. He'd interacted with Kitchell only a few times, but he seemed like a nice guy. Manager and told me everything. Oh, is this the student? Hello. Songi bowed. As they exchanged greetings, a big, muscular man approached and snapped at them. Enough small talk. Let's go! We're not here for a picnic, and it's already 9 o'clock. He returned to the gate without waiting for a response. He had a strong presence about him. Jinwoo turned to Kitchell. Who is he? Oh, he's a new A-rank member, but he wasn't too happy about someone observing the training. He said a dungeon isn't a playground. He's an A rank? Kitchell nodded. A prideful A rank would act like that. Jinwoo had another question. What's the level of the strike squad today? 1 A rank, 7 B ranks, and 4 C ranks, so 12 in total. A and B rank hunters to raid a C rank dungeon. High ranks aside, a newbie is still a newbie. This is for them to gain dungeon experience. Kitchell spoke proudly. He added that they would be assigned to high-level dungeons immediately after this one training session, because they were that powerful. Sure, but an A rank and 7 B rank still seems excessive. Jinwoo's gaze changed. There was only one reason Sangnan had okayed this. He was showing off the White Tiger Guild's excellent new recruits in hopes of changing Jinwoo's mind. Contrary to Songmin's and Kitchell's expectations, though, Jinwoo looked at the gate with disappointment. It was a C rank gate. Compared to the gate's level, the members were overpowered. If the raid goes too smoothly, my plan won't work. This was his biggest concern. He tried to tell himself things would work out. She'll figure it out herself. She just had to understand how useless an E-rank hunter would be in a dungeon. That was all. When are we going in? Unaware of Jinwoo's ulterior motive, Songi was nagging him to head inside. He looked at her sideways and saw she was flush with excitement. Let's see how long she'll stay excited. Jinwoo swallowed his laugh as he spoke to Kitchell. We're going in, too. Oh, yes. Kitchell looked around before whispering to Jinwoo. Pissed. Hunter Sung, if you participate in the raid, it'll end too quickly. So please just watch. The purpose of the visit was to observe the training, so that was a redundant request. Of course. He was going to hit a bunch of C-rank dungeons with Jinho tomorrow anyway, so no need to interfere with the White Tiger Guild's training. He was planning to bring out his shadow army in the dungeons with Jinho, so that was why he'd brought Songi all the way here. I don't want to bust out my shadow soldiers in front of her. If Songi saw how easily Jinwoo could defeat magic beasts using his shadow soldiers, her delusions of hunter grandeur would only swell. The two walked to the front of the gate together. Unlike the A-rank hunter they'd met earlier, the others welcomed them. Hello! Nice to meet you. Since this raid wasn't about the money, the more hunters there were, the better. As was the custom, they took turns introducing themselves. When it was the A-rank hunter's turn, however, pass. And inside the gate he went. We should go in too. The White Tiger Guild trainees entered the gate one by one. Songi looked back at Jinwoo right before she went in. How about you, mister? Jinwoo crossed his arms and replied, You first. She looked nervous but nodded and ran in. Jinwoo gave a small sigh as he stood before the gate. He sensed someone was watching him and looked over to see Kitchell waving and cheering him on. He turned back to the gate. Wait. Its surface continued to vibrate and ripple. The gate is supposed to stop moving and look like a black membrane when no one is passing through it. But this one continued to undulate like waves. There was something different about it. Jinwoo tapped the gate with his finger. Shloop. The surface was a sticky goo. It stuck to his finger and stretched like gum as he pulled back. It can't be. Jinwoo whipped around, and he and Kitchell exchanged urgent looks. Kitchell could also tell that something had gone wrong. Jinwoo shouted, Call your main strike squad now! Before he could say any more, Jinwoo was sucked into the gate. What was that? A assistant manager? Kitchell ran toward the gate. 3 more White Tiger employees rushed after him. Kitchell stood in front of the gate, looking dumbfounded. And in no way. The hunters weren't the only newbies. He'd also brought new office staffers for training purposes. Of course, none of them was familiar with this kind of phenomenon. The other staffers looked at Kitchell, the panic clear on their faces. Assistant Manager Hyun, the surface of the gate is turning red. The red color spread outward like someone had spilled a drop of blood on the surface. Kitchell ignored the others and hurriedly made a call. Click. Yes, Kitchell? Sir, it's a red gate. The gate the trainees entered just transformed into a red gate. What? Songmin's tone became aggressive. What the hell are you talking about? How can a red gate spawn from a C-rank one? Kitchell looked back to see that the gate was entirely red now. The rippling on the surface had slowed. He swallowed hard. I'm not sure either, but it's definitely a red gate, sir. What?